Well, thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction. And as you've just heard, my day job is I run the FT in America. And from that vantage point, I spend a lot of time thinking about the trajectory of the American economy. And on that point, I have two bits of good news and two bits of bad news. The good news is that the American economy is recovering. If you look at the program this year at the Aspen Ideas Festival, it's very striking just how few disaster seminars there are on the economy. We're not talking about banking crisis, which is good news. Second bit of good news is, or at least if you're an American, it's good news, is that America is very much a key engine of global growth right now, if not the key engine. Christine Lagarde from the IMF recently pointed to America as very much the most vibrant, dominant economy in the world today. Bad news is that if you are in a room full of pygmies and you're normal-sized, it's very easy to look impressive. The reason why America looks good today is because the rest of the world, to use a non-economic term, truly sucks in economic terms, or most of the rest of the world. Japan, well, we had Abenomics, lots of excitement there. Some of you may have Japanese stocks in your portfolio, but it's hardly posting vibrant growth. The Eurozone, we're having a will they, won't they dance this week about Greece, potential disaster. I'm going to be moderating a panel tomorrow morning with Larry Summers and the former US ambassador to Greece to talk about what's happening there. So I won't dwell on that, but the Eurozone is hardly a reason to be cheerful. China, to my mind, in some ways is an even bigger threat right now than Greece. And the rest of the emerging markets are pretty worrying too. Brazil is no longer dancing. So the global picture is not good, and that could potentially drag American growth down. Because the other reason to not be cheerful this morning, even on a glorious day like this, is that the second quarter growth in America is estimated to have been around about 2.5%. That's what Bill Dudley from the Fed told us the other day, which sounds better than the Eurozone, brilliant compared to Greece, but frankly pretty feeble compared to where America has been in the past. So the question we're going to discuss this morning is, what can be done to actually put America back on a more sustainable growth track, and a growth track that can actually withstand Greece, China, anything that Janet Yellen might be about to unleash later this year? That is a big question. And I want to get granular. I don't want rhetoric. I don't want streams of statistics. I want to do the economist equivalent of pop idol and ask you, what exactly, in terms of tangible policies, would you like to see unfold over the next year or two? If you had a magic wand today and you were sitting in the Fed, you were sitting in the White House, what exactly are the top 2 or 3 policies that you'd like to see to actually get some sustainable growth over the next year? As you've heard, we've got a fantastic panel. I won't reintroduce them because they've been reintroduced, but we have a great combination of Washington perspective, political perspective, private sector perspectives, and Zoe Baird, who chairs the Merkel Foundation, is a combination of, if you like, NGO perspective, but has straddled both worlds. So we have a lot of great viewpoints. But before we kick off, oh, thank you. Don't disattach yourself from the microphone. Exactly. Just shows this is part of the new vibrant economy, I hope. Before we kick off, though, I want to do a quick question to the audience and you too. It's going to be a straightforward vote, a show of hands, because I think it will help to frame the debate. And I want each of you to think, when you look around the American economy today and see the current growth trajectory, are you very satisfied with the growth trajectory? Are you a little bit satisfied? Or are you pretty dissatisfied? 3 options. And I'm going to ask you all to vote with a show of hands, including people on the podium. So, who is very satisfied with the trajectory of American growth today?
That guy is.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Don't be shy. 3. The sun is shining. We're in Aspen. Okay, 4. Okay, 4. Who is a little bit satisfied? Okay. And who is dissatisfied? Right. Okay, well, let me start then with Senator Warner, who is actually a bit more optimistic than everyone else on your panel. You're feeling quite good about growth, are you, right now?
No, I was more in the middle category, and I guess two quick comments. While I'm introduced as someone from the public sector, I still can lay claim that I've been in the private sector longer than I was in the public sector. So, as a marker, I do also think it was interesting, Gillian, that you commented that if you had a magic wand and you could be at the Fed or the White House, and you didn't mention being on the floor of the Senate as a place there where you can get a lot done.
Okay, tell us what you do with your magic wand from the Senate.
On the well, first do no harm, which has not necessarily been the evidence of the last couple of years. In the notion of trying to give quick, concise answers, the three things that I think from a policy standpoint we could do for immediate short-term, a bit of boost to the economy. One, avoid another fiscal crisis around the stupidity of sequestration. Sequestration comes rolling back in October 1. It will, both on the defense side and non-defense side, we have kind of cleaned out the underbrush. It will make a significant, I think, decline in growth. Alleviating that, number one, would be top on a list. Second, Highway Trust Fund is bankrupt at the end of this month. It's July now. Actually putting a permanent funding source to regenerate investment in infrastructure. And third is at least start down the path. We can get into more discussion on this on tax reform and allow the north of $2 trillion that is offshore to be repatriated back in a way that could be invested back in the United States.
Okay, well, those are three very interesting ideas. So don't have another fiscal crisis. Deal with the Highway Trust, which of course is coming up very, very soon.
Right now.
And then start talking about tax reform. What odds would you give to any of those three things actually happening?
I actually think there may be an opportunity. You're not going to grapple with sequestration and/or Highway Trust without some revenue mix. You're only going to get one bite at revenues this year. You also have to deal with entitlements. Obviously, as somebody who is involved with the Simpson Bowles and Gang of Six efforts in the Senate, they come paired. But I would say sequestration and Highway Trust, I'd put it north of 50-50.
Okay, so you're quite optimistic that we won't have another sequestration crisis. That's the good news. And you're quite optimistic that we won't have
quite. I'm saying
north of 50-50.
North of 50-50. I'm not saying I'm not at 80 or 90. I'm in that little satisfied category.
Okay. And since we're dealing with an audience that is very alive to the state of business, give us your probability of meaningful tax reform. We can ask the audience if you like instead. We can compare the answers.
I think there is some momentum around international that will deal with repatriation. The challenge with doing international on a one-off, which I'm not sure people have thought through, is there is value in doing international, and there's value in staying competitive in a global market. As someone who strongly supported the trade deals, also strongly support the idea that we ought to be actually supporting the financing of those trade deals around the Export-Import Bank. But if you do international on a one-off basis, I'm not sure my colleagues have fully thought through the implication of saying, here's the great news for multinational corporations. We have now, whether the camp or the Obama proposal, given you a going forward rate at 15 or 19%. But if you're the poor domestic corporation, you're still going to pay 35, or if you're a pass-through, 39. I'm not sure how that will play at home.
Right. I must say, one of the things I love about Senator Warner is that you love to get geeky. I love that from the FT, because the FT is all about being a curious geek. But with your technology private sector background, you know a lot about how the actual minutiae of tax reform actually plays out. And something that, to my mind, is going to be a key test case of the maturity of the political debate in the coming months is whether anyone actually picks up on these incredibly important issues and starts talking about them in public.
Well, there are people talking. I'm talking about them in public, and there's a whole something that, again, not wanting to take too much on the front end, so we can get this into a conversation. But the whole framework around tax reform, I think, is fundamentally changing, because while we have talked for a decade about broadening the base and lowering the rates in America, the rest of the world hasn't stayed static. So you're seeing in the rest of the world, particularly the EU, move forward on something called, here's my quiz question. How many of you in this room have heard of Patent Box or Innovation Box? Raise your hand.
Okay, the two geeks in the audience.
The two geeks in the audience.
The four geeks in the audience.
The four geeks in the audience. The quick top line on Patent Box and Innovation Box is that Europe has woken up to the idea that in America, we still do pretty well around research and high-value jobs. Even if Apple doesn't assemble a product in America, they still do the research here. So now the rest of the industrial world is saying, if we put a patent box or innovation box in place and say, move your intellectual property and a nexus to your research, we will give you a blended rate on any excess profits of not where most of the EU is on their corporate rates in low 20s, but actually the UK is at 10, France is at 8, Ireland will probably come up at 5 or 6. So the game has shifted from America saying competitive, moving from 35 to 28 to 25, sorry about all these numbers, but to where the rest of the world is moving to 12 to 15. Now the reason they're able to do that, and before you say, aha, that's because America's overtaxed, America, out of the 34 OECD countries, is 32nd in total tax rate. We tax dramatically lower. I'm not saying we should bring in a European model by any means, but our revenue stream is dramatically, dramatically lower than the rest of the world because they all have a different tax structure than us. So, more to come if so inclined, but I'm sure I can see people's eyes start to glaze over. I start with this.
Well, as I say, it's good to be geeky right now, particularly when it comes to tax policy. These kind of things really, really matter. And Tom, you sit in an interesting position because you run Southern, big utility company, energy company. Tom told me yesterday a fascinating fact about Southern is that if you look at the stock market volatility of Southern amongst the S&P 500, it used to be the second least volatile stock, which was only beaten by the maker of Spam. It's now the least volatile stock in the S&P 500. So
2014.
Tom oversees a company which is even more boring than Spam, or even more stable than Spam, to put it positively.
There you go.
You work in a world where you want to have a stable business climate. Stable is good if you're actually involved in business. You also chair the Atlanta Fed. So you spend a lot of time talking to people like Janet Yellen and people like that about what's happening with the Federal Reserve. Keen to hear from you about whether you think the events in Greece will actually cause the Fed to delay interest rate hikes. But can you tell me first, why are you not so optimistic about the economy and what needs to be done to get it back on a better track?
I'm very optimistic about the economy. I just don't think, look, my stuff's out on YouTube and you can Google it up, and if you want to go in depth on my stuff, it's hard to do that in these panels. But one of the things I like to say, and you said you didn't want platitudes, but I'm going to start with one. So many policymakers in America are trying to dumb down American aspirations. I think we can do so much better than what we're doing as a nation in so many ways. And so my role in the Fed, I'm also on the executive committee of the Conference of Chairs at the Big Fed. I chair the Atlanta Fed. I chair Southern Company. I chair for America under the Department of Homeland Security all things related to cyber protection, physical terrorism, and natural disaster response. And now we're trying to knit together coordinated responses in the so-called lifeline sectors. That's telecom, transportation, water, finance, and electricity. And so I kind of have this interesting perspective of knitting together where I think, from a risk and return standpoint, America can do better. It is clear to me, if I get parochial for a minute, that when I think about the families that we are privileged to serve in the Southeast, about 4.5 million customers, 46% of which make less than $40,000 a year. And when I think about this kind of stalled economic recovery, who in the world would have said 2.5% is pretty good? Now, I get that we're interconnected and we have all this malaise in Europe and event risk in Greece and perhaps Russia and perhaps the Middle East and China and everything else going on. And so we're not immune from all those risks. And we are. I wouldn't say we're the king among, whatever it is, the giant among pygmies. I think we've got darn good cards to play. One of the ways we can play those cards is to provide solutions for Americans that are thirsting for this kind of thing. I think we talk about frozen government and everything else. And Senator, I think you guys have moved a lot in the past year or so, and you're starting to do some things that are going to benefit us all. But there's so much more we can do to get better. Energy policy. For the first time in our lifetimes, your parents' lifetimes, we have the ability to be energy secure, not independent. We can be a net energy exporter. To be provocative, what I want to do is to harness all of the blessings of resource that this nation has and permit us to grow our economy in a way that currently we are fettered. That is, we're the third largest consumer, about the third, depending on what day it is, of natural gas in America. I believe we ought to export natural gas 100%. We ought to be able, come on.
I think
We
you've
ought
done
to
this
be able
before.
to export all the oil we can produce, okay? We need to build out the infrastructure of the United States, build the pipes, get jobs going, create an engine for growth where we can create an unassailable advantage relative to any other economy on the planet to grow jobs, restart manufacturing, grow personal incomes, make American lives better. We can do that, okay? Let us do it. Turn the thing loose. When I get more granular here, I talked
Okay,
about
that's your first wish. Yep.
yeah. Well, actually, I got a whole bunch here.
Okay. Well,
But no, I'll be
ration it
limited.
to 3,
I'll be
okay?
limited. I know
Yeah.
it. I know it. I'll be limited. That's what I'm saying. Read the stuff on the internet if you want.
Okay, give us a top line. 3.
Hang on. Electricity policy. Okay. I think that when people say all the above, I used to run around and say all the arrows in the quiver, and Obama, usurped me there. So now it's all the above. There's one company doing all the above in America right now. It's Southern Company. We are leading the renaissance of new nuclear in America. We are building a coal plant. This nation has terrific coal reserves, but we're doing it in a way where the carbon footprint is better than natural gas. We're capturing 65% of the carbon we emit, and we're using it in a technique called enhanced oil recovery, where it's not a waste stream. We actually produce more domestic oil. And so there is synergy between what is otherwise a problem and a waste stream, and now we're creating something of value with it. And while in the United States I wonder about the application of it, we think it's a wonderful technology. We developed it. In Eastern Europe, in China, we got to realize that we are in this worldwide economy, and these kinds of solutions have worldwide applications, and we need to get behind those things. Third is natural gas. We need to understand the environmental implications of fracking. We need to understand understanding what's going to happen with water. I think that's as big, perhaps bigger in the future, an environmental issue than air. Renewables. I'm an enormous fan of renewables. Southern Company is one of the leading owners of photovoltaic solar. But I'm telling you, the tax policy we have, and I'll get to tax policy here in a minute, is a little crazy on renewables. I take advantage of them. Mm-hmm. One of the largest owners of solar. I take advantage of them. I think it's bad policy. Let's see. Last is energy efficiency. I'm all for that. Innovation needs to be kind of a moonshot type national fervor, especially in energy innovation.
Right.
And we can do that. Tax policy, fiscal policy, we got to have the vision and courage to deal with this stuff. American citizens want us to. When you think back again about the families we're privileged to serve, let me tell you something, sports fans, probably not represented in this room very broadly. Those families are making very tough kitchen table economic decisions every day. Why can't we? We need comprehensive tax reform. I supported, the Simpson Bowles stuff, the Baucus-Camp proposal, wipe it all clean. If we try and fight a land war, trying to fix the Byzantine tax code we have, we will never get there.
Right.
You've got to start in a bigger way. So there's another one.
Okay, well, that's...
Hang on, and then I'll stop.
I think it's 3.5
stop.
wishes so far. Okay, one more, yeah.
The other one I would just
Okay,
say is we're going to have to deal with preserving the nation's financial integrity. Fix the balance sheet, reduce the size and cost of government. I said yesterday, I'll say it again today, I love our government, okay? I think it's wonderful. I work with it every day. But in a corporate sense, government is like the home office. And what you got to do is reduce the size of overhead in any business. We want it to be as effective as we can. And so we've got to do those things, okay? Those are hard things to do. We've got to have the vision and courage to deal with entitlements. We've got to make sure that we can follow through on the promises of the future to all of our children.
Right. Well, that is a rousing agenda. Senator Warner.
No, Zoe gets some kind of, but
Yeah.
I get, and most of what Tom said, I agree. But there are, at some point, you got to also layer on facts.
Oh, listen.
No, but let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go. No, yeah. On some of, not just, particularly on the fiscal issues. On the energy stuff, I actually concur. But you also have to have an ability to fund the infrastructure that's going to create the kind of growth that we're talking about. It doesn't come for free.
That's a piece of cake. Let's go.
Let Zoe have a chance, and let me get
Okay,
a
you can
90-second
a ding dong in a minute. Well, listen, I'm going to bring Zoe in because you've spent a lot of time in the last few years looking at the issue of the kind of innovation that makes Tom so excited, the technology that Senator Warner is looking at a lot. You're also looking a lot at jobs. And technology and jobs is a pretty uneasy relationship right now. I mean, I think it was McKinsey recently came out with a report saying that almost half of the American jobs will be replaced by technology, by robots and digital networks in the next 20 years. Does that make you scared? And what can be done to actually counter that? What are your 3 magic wand wishes?
So listening to this conversation, my own background, Gillian was unable to peg me. My own background is working in government, working in the private sector, GE, Aetna, working in the nonprofit sector. My view is that all of what they've been talking about, with the exception of maybe some of the energy conversation, is great, but it's not the future. It's all the basic blocking and tackling that America has to do, whether it be something the government has to do or something the private sector has to do. But the future is looking at the fact that technology and globalization have hollowed out Americans' jobs. The reference that was made here is actually to an Oxford report, your countryman, that McKinsey has done a lot to give legs to, that 47% of American jobs are at risk of being eliminated by technology. And it's our view, and we have this very broad collaboration that Howard Schultz and I chaired of CEOs, technologists, faith-based leaders, community organizers. And we wrote a book called America's Moment, to plug it like the plug for the Google search you might be doing when you leave this room. America's Moment, which has a very optimistic view that not only do we have to take technology and globalization and make it work for people, but that we can. So 2 basic topics I'll hit now, and then we can go into much more depth. First of all, we can grow many more good jobs here in America. We have to face the fact that the world is growing a middle class, and what does that mean for us? And it's our view that we can scale the export of our services dramatically. We're a service economy. We can teach people, we can provide telemedicine, we can provide education in every field, we can help with construction. And our agenda for exports actually has the AFL-CIO signed onto it, who participated in this book as well. We can use data to enable loans to be given to small businesses because we can understand their markets. If you look at eBay and their capacity to understand the markets every one of those businesses is dealing in and which companies are succeeding and which are not, why shouldn't that be an engine for PayPal to be lending to these people, not just taking in credit? And that's beginning to happen, and there are many examples we can give. Syndication of credit into small businesses. Many examples. This is just beginning to happen. And then really importantly, okay, that's the growing jobs piece, but the other major focus is preparing Americans for the jobs of the future. And here, we need to create a skills-based marketplace for jobs, not a diploma-based marketplace for jobs. Jeffrey Canada, who you know from Waiting for Superman and the Harlem Children's Zone, was a member of our group. And Jeff has an op-ed coming out, I think, on Monday that takes forward some of what we've been talking about, which is, as he puts it, maybe I spoke too soon, that we need to not only pursue a college diploma for Americans, but there are many, many other paths 70% of Americans for decades have not obtained a college diploma, but they have great skills. So we're working, we announced last week in Phoenix and in Colorado that we're beginning to build a skills-based marketplace for jobs to see if we can jumpstart this, and we invite everybody in their own communities to be thinking about how do you do that. So LinkedIn's partnering with us, and companies are committing to make transparent the skills that are needed for jobs instead of just the college diploma. I mean, another statistic that is mind-blowing that McKinsey has talked about a lot too, which is that 60% of job postings for executive assistants today require a college diploma, when only 20% of the incumbents in those jobs have one. So we have these blanket diplomas that are keeping people from opportunity. So we're working with the retail sector to develop entire career paths where people can get badges like you do if you're in the military when you achieve something. We're working with IT companies, energy companies, others. And we really feel that all of you have the capacity to turn what you do as employers or as educators into a skills-based marketplace for jobs.
Right, so your three magic wishes would be to focus on service sector exports rather than just energy exports or industrial exports, not just widgets, but lots of services too, to think a lot about technology and how that can grow growth, and then try and address a skills gap above all else.
Yep.
Do you think that's something, though, that the private sector should be looking at, or are you looking to people like Congress, White House, government agencies? I mean, are you doing this because you've simply given up on government to do this for you?
I would say that it will happen faster if it's led in the private sector and with communities and nonprofits. Our announcements in Colorado were with Governor Hickenlooper and the Lieutenant Governor, who was here earlier in the week talking here at the Ideas Festival about this, and with the mayor in Phoenix. So government has a part, in part, as Tom Perez will tell you, who was here earlier this week, also Secretary of Labor, they have money to put into things. Let's make sure it goes to the right places. It doesn't do any good to solidify the old industrial model of how we prepare people for jobs or how we develop small businesses. Small businesses are our engine of job growth. As much as we love big companies, they're not creating the jobs in America. So the government has to make sure, as Mark says, it does no harm, but it also has to direct resources to support what can happen in the private sector. But the government's not creating the jobs, the private sector is. The government's not educating people. Our great institutions are, and we're trying to get internal company training made externally facing. So all the possibilities for how people can learn and train can be deployed most broadly using the power of technology and the internet and networks and all the things we do to buy shoes.
The word I like to use on that is enable. When I think about the pendulum of change that is happening, it's completely understandable, it's completely rational, following kind of the blow up around the year 2000, right? The dot-com craze and the recent blow up we had here recently, right? I understand that we've had a lot more regulation, a lot more kind of overreach, but it's time to swing it back. And what the government needs to do, they have some very important roles to play. I could spell those out later if you want. But what they really need to do is clear the playing field and let the private sector grow, especially small business.
Would you agree?
I would, a couple points. One, my background, for those who didn't know, was I was in the wireless industry, co-founder of Nextel. Also makes me the only politician that says, even when you're speaking, leave your cell phones on. Doesn't bother me at all, enormous upside in technology, enormous upside in innovation. Just a couple of, again, data points. I actually, on most of Tom's energy approach, I agree. One of the fastest growth points in our economy in the last decade has been the tremendous energy growth. Nobody would have thought that America could have been energy sustainable and an exporter a decade ago. And I know we're at Aspen, but another point that Tom made is, even with the carbon rules in place, America's still going to have 31% of its fuel generated by coal. So how you use coal cleaner has got to be part of the mix on, even as we wrestle with the challenge around climate change. Right. So there are things around export that are commodities that actually oil export will lower the price of gasoline. Mm-hmm. But there's got to be some trade here, I believe, in terms of how the industry also helps us meet some of our needs. Where I would potentially differ, and you know, it's an easy applause line about bringing down government overhead. When I was governor of Virginia, we were named best managed state in the whole country. We were named best state for business. I've walked that walk. I do find, and Tom, I think, is true to his word, but when we found, as somebody who was the driving force behind trying to get Simpson-Bowles implemented in the Senate, the rubber hit the road when it moved past the CEO suite down to the CFO suite, and they said, well, actually, we don't want to give up this tax expenditure. We don't want to wipe it clean. You know, we want to keep ours, but go after the others. It will require a major kind of blowing up of the tax code, because we're going to be chasing, again, you got to have some data here. For every point you lower the corporate rate, revenue neutral, not raising more money, revenue neutral, $100 billion. Lower at 10 points, $1 trillion, over 10 in terms of eliminating tax expenditures. I think that's what we need to do. We need to be, I actually believe we need to be even lower than 28 or 25, but it's going to take, you know, a dramatic transition. Last point on the government piece, then I want to raise one quick point on kind of how we go forward. Our current business plan for America, which is a budget, for every dollar you send Washington, 18 cents goes into everything in the domestic discretionary bucket. So that's all your environmental, that's all your energy, but it's also all your education. And I love what we do in the private, or the public, or the private sector NGOs on education. I'm a big advocate for that. A personal foundation does this. But the Commonwealth of Virginia spends more in 2 years on public education than the whole Gates Foundation has as their corpus. So if the NGOs can move the battleship, but ultimately it is still public dollars that drive most of our education. It's also all our infrastructure and R&D. The current business plan that the Congress, I didn't vote for, the Congress adopted, would cut domestic discretionary over the next decade from 18 cents to 9 cents. Put on your business hat. Don't be a politician, put on your business hat. I was a venture capitalist after I started Nextel. Would you ever invest in an enterprise that spent less than 10% of its revenues on its workforce, plant and equipment, and staying ahead of the competition? Which for government is education, infrastructure, and R&D. That is a faulty business plan in a global economy. So yes, we got to get it right. Yes, we got to take on entitlements. But yes, you've also got to pay for what we're doing, as opposed to simply borrowing from the next generation, which I think is the greatest travesty taking place for people of my age. We're taking away from the millennial generation, which now at 83 million have bumped off the baby boomers as the top. And there's a whole host of questions. I do think different approaches in terms of credentialing. One of the areas that I've been working on recently, we talked with Gillian yesterday, did a little seminar here yesterday afternoon on, was the whole notion of the sharing or on-demand or gig economy. Lots of folks coming into this, particularly millennials, different revenue sources. You know, the Uber driver and rents out the home Airbnb and does an IT consultancy, works on something else. Great opportunity. But we do have to ask the question, is this fastest growing part of the economy? And it's not small businesses that are the fastest growing part of the economy. It's startups, which is a very different sector than small businesses. Small business actually has remained, the hardware store numbers are still pretty constant. It is the startups where this is all happening. But we do have to ask a policy question. I don't want to stop the innovation. I don't want to have a top-down government solution. But I also know with no safety net created for all these folks, no unemployment, no workman's comp, no disability, people can go from here to here. And when they're here, they're going to be back on the government rolls. That doesn't make sense. So how do we not slow innovation, not slow different credentialing, but also think at least what the potential downside on some of these things would be?
Let me jump in, though.
Yeah.
So I sat in the room at the Business Roundtable. I'm a member of the Business Roundtable in the Tax Committee, and we talked through the specific memory I'm going to give you is Baucus Camp. And there were people in there that would have been disadvantaged by Baucus Camp, but out of a sense of patriotism, people around that table said, this is the right thing for America. And I guarantee you, there is enough critical mass, there are enough chemicals in the ocean for something to crawl up on the beach here. I think energy policy, I think tax policy, all pointed at rational economic growth. I think people will make trade-offs for the greater good.
And God willing, that's what I hope, and that's why I'm still in the business I'm in. What I simply saw, having made the presentations to the BRT a number of times, where they said, all right, Mark, we're with you. Saxby Chambliss and I, my great Republican senator from Georgia, we came in, we're with you. We would then get down and make the same presentation to the CFOs, and they would say, well, we actually won't agree to tax reform on a revenue neutral basis. So at some point, again, I'm not arguing the particulars here. I am arguing that to make this leap, it is going to require kind of a linking arms and all of us jumping. And everybody's going to have some skin in the game. That's right. Every business is going to have some skin in the game. We're going to have to acknowledge the fact that because we're all blessed to live a lot longer, Medicare and Social Security are not sustainable on their current rates. Just the plain ratio of going from, when I was a kid, 16 people working for every one person on retirement, to today with 3 people working for every one person on retirement.
Senator,
it's math.
Senator,
I would argue that the reason you guys are fighting...
We're not fighting. We're actually agreeing.
We're passionate about what we do.
Okay.
We're not fighting
They're
at all.
passionately debating.
But you're throwing darts at each other, telling each other the CEOs won't agree, or...
No, I'm saying the CEOs will. I'm saying get it down to the tax policy people. Make sure the CEOs tell the CFOs and the tax policy people that we got to blow up the tax rate.
What the country needs is a vision of where all that's going. And thank you. And if you have one, stand up. The challenge now, and the reason we've all given up on Washington's capacity to move and are looking to state and local governments, like when you were governor, or looking to companies, like Southern, is that there's a tremendous fighting over scraps going on in Washington. It's very backward looking. It's what's left that we can grab for our people. It is not a debate, a discussion, an engagement around a vision for America's future. And the future is going to be so radically different than anything we've known to date. 100 years ago, we moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy. And we did things like invented high schools, invented public education, we invented libraries, we paved the roads, we did all the things that these guys are talking about. We changed our tax policy and who was doing taxation. It moved from state and local governments to the federal level as a center of gravity in the course of our history. We don't today have a debate about the vision of what America is going to be like in 10 and 20 years. And that's what our presidential candidates need to do.
I don't know if that's fully true. There are a group of rational people in both political parties.
Good.
But they don't show up on the news. I mean, you want to get a vision, hire I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, hire rational people that can do math.
Well.
If we hire the outliers who are the screamers,
Well,
who dominate the political debate right now, who drive on a single issue, or who've never run anything.
there you go.
That's fair.
And
That's fair.
they have a magic elixir solution. This stuff is hard. I came in as a business guy. The idea, I'm going to go run government like a business. They have different time horizons. There are many business principles you can bring to them. But investing in a child's preschool education is not going to show a quarterly based return. Net for society, it's the right thing to do. So, I think there are a lot of folks, and I did not ever think I'd be here defending Washington, but we do need to allow those who want to actually get stuff done, rather than simply criticize, a little more space.
I
That's
agree with that, and I
that's
think
chemicals.
this is the moment.
Quickly, because I want to bring the audience in a second.
Okay. But that's just chemicals in the sea comment. I believe there are people in Washington. Look, I walk the halls of Congress relentlessly. I work on the governors on both sides of the aisle. People want to get this done. And I think it's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith. And I think people will join arms for the greater good. I really believe that. Now, to
Don't
your
hire
point,
anybody who signs one of these pledges. I don't care if the pledge is never raise your tax,
Oh, yeah,
or
yeah,
a
that's
pledge
dumb.
never touch
Hang on, hang on.
You hire those people, you're going to get more of what you got.
But the point I want to get across to you all is you will never solve these big problems through incrementalism. We're going to have to take some big steps. And it's going to take some courage.
Amen.
But I think America's ready for that.
Amen.
Well, I'm going to bring in the part of America that's sitting in front of me right now to ask some questions, because we have a very engaged and very knowledgeable audience. I'm already being besieged by a hand. So, question here first, and then back there. We have a microphone there. It would be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself. And if you make a long statement instead of asking questions, I will be ruthless and cut you off. So be, exactly,
Pretty ruthless.
be brief.
I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to touch 2 points. One, technology does not replace jobs. They said that about Cyrus Hall McCormick, took out 7 jobs. I want to reinforce with an idea that Tom has heard before. The senator asked for big things. Tom asked for big things. The biggest innovation problem in power is finding a new way to store electricity so that the power that's coming into this room right now doesn't have to come live from a turbine or Niagara Falls or what have you. So the government, because no company can do it, needs to develop a new way to store electricity. My parameters, and again, forgive me, Tom has heard it privately and publicly, you got to be able to charge your car in 5 minutes to run 200 miles. No company is strong enough to do it alone. The government needs to do it.
Hey,
Okay.
we've had this conversation
Yeah.
before, and he's right. Look, the big issue in electricity is you can't store it. Now, we're working right now with Tesla. We're one of the early companies, and we're trying to figure out ways to use the batteries. But one of the things we're doing with research and development, electricity is an at-scale business. So let's redefine what we mean by a battery. Perhaps the Earth is a battery.
Right.
And perhaps what we can do is compressed air energy storage, pump storage, hydro. Great big storage ideas to really help the problem.
And Billy, decentralized generation is absolutely the future. And thank God there's somebody in the utility industry who's not afraid of that. Amen. But in a zero-sum game where we're deciding whether we cut energy research or NIH, that is not a good long-term prescription right now. That's the reality of what we're dealing with in the day job I've got. So you're going to need to change the debate frame.
Well, I'll give you the project. He's saying we got to structure a project. I'll give you the project we're doing. We run, Southern Company runs, the nation's Carbon Capture Research Center. There's one in America. We run it in Wilsonville, Alabama. That's where innovation is going on right now in taking streams of effluents off of coal plant in this case, and we're trying to figure out ways to grab the carbon efficiently and then use it somehow.
Right. Well, I guess that's a way of saying that an energy company might be more stable than spam, but it's certainly not as boring. So,
No, it's not boring.
Yeah.
It's just stable.
question over there.
Gentleman from New York, my observation is that the three of you really embody very interesting aspects of the future, both the technological and the robotic. Tom, you, the general faith in the American business and opportunities and willingness to create things. And Mark, you with respect to the how-to part. As I sat here, what occurred to me is that we need a direction, as all of you have expressed, and we all know that there's a lot missing in our infrastructure today, whether it's roads or whether it's other technological systems or methods for transportation energy. It seems to me that what we would need is a major infrastructure incentive and something like the Moon Project that the country could get behind altogether. And which has enormous ramifications for all kinds of small businesses in servicing that development. My question is, and my question is, all of this is a role for government. How does that get accomplished?
So,
how does government initiate this?
How do you revitalize American infrastructure?
Well, wait a minute, I'm going to pick up on an idea. You said create incentives to do great things, right? The knee-jerk reaction of policymakers is typically tax things you don't like. All that does is make the tax system worse and creates weird behavior because you never understand the unintended consequence. I think one of the most important roles, and we've all agreed on this, for government to play is to fund research and development, to do public-private collaborations and solve big problems. X-Prize kind of stuff sponsored by the United States government is great stuff. Hey, one more comment, and you got to follow up, is one of the things, I have a little bit of a math background. Everybody familiar with chaos theory? One of the ideas about chaos theory is that the variance in nature is way bigger than we typically measure. One of the things we always do in thinking about policy, and that's why I have great faith in businesses' ability to solve the problems of the future, is that we always underestimate the value of technology advances. And I think we can find our way.
And,
Let's,
right, well, let me hit exactly that. Here's the craziness of our current circumstance. We've cut infrastructure investment as a percentage of GDP in half since the 70s. We actually have an office in the Department of Treasury that advises American pension funds on how to invest in European and Asian infrastructure because we've got no vehicle in America. Now, China last week set up the Asian Infrastructure Bank, $100 billion, their lead, and UK, Australia, everybody else is all in. So what we could do, and I had 11 senators, 5 Republicans, 6 Democrats. I think we can actually get this done. We could create an infrastructure financing authority in the United States, whether we call it an infrastructure bank, financing authority, investment grade quality, independent review. Good idea, leverage up hundreds of billions of dollars worth of projects. But financing alone doesn't get a deal done. You also have to have funding. And we have, because of the advances, the good technology advances that have come through higher fuel-efficient vehicles, we have an enormously declining source of revenue around our funding source. So you got to have, we're running $20 billion a year deficit, borrowing from NIH or borrowing from defense or borrowing from education to fill in the hole in the gas tax fund. You got to either raise the gas tax or you got to find another funding source to fill in that hole. You can't do it just with financing.
Right, well, can I see who else wants to? I'm going to take a question right back there at the very back.
I
think we have a microphone going. And again, we haven't got that much time, so be brief and be to the point.
And that would be an admonition to us as well.
Need a vision, need to think about big things, need more macro change. Heard it. In an environment where our government couldn't even bring the Simpson-Bowles recommendations, which took over a year to craft, had bipartisan support, and no one agreed with all of it, so it must have been a pretty good compromise. Right. When you can't even get a vote on that in Congress, is it realistic that our government, in the identity politics environment that we have today, where we don't spend money on that 18 cents because no one in that 18 cents votes, right? Is it realistic that we expect our government to actually solve these problems in the next 3 years?
If we're sitting here, we've all done pretty well. We're doing great.
I would ask a different question.
I would argue, the alternative is a pretty dismal. I do not give up on the notion of America that we can't get this fixed. But it will work. Well, then fire a bunch of people and hire new ones. But don't. Fair enough.
Okay.
But when you turn the keys over to the outliers on either side, what scares me the most is the polarization crowd on both political parties, who are more about throwing rocks at the other side than actually about getting stuff done.
Well, as I say, right now it's good to be a geek.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think maybe you're asking the wrong question, because at the current moment, and I realize there are a lot of people frustrated because, we have turned over politicians or whatever, but there's a lot of politicians we're not turning over. And I would really encourage you to be asking a different question. Not are they going to be able to do it, but are you going to be able to do it? I think the real question that people have to ask, you see how quickly we were able to change gay marriage in America. In 6 years, we moved and changed that policy and the expectations. We need the similar kind of big vision for what this country has to look like. Ask every presidential candidate every time they open their mouths, what are they doing against that vision? Not what are they doing on all the things that they've talked about for 30 years. And to begin to use all the people in this room who spend a lot of money in politics, and to begin to use the social networks that all of you are part of, and let's, from the outside in, change what happens and make it unacceptable. It's not good enough to say we've given up on Washington or they can't do it.
Yeah, you can't let yourself be cynical. We all have some level of that right now, but we've got to have the greater good in mind here and drop it and move on.
Right, well, I'm going to switch the side of the room because I don't want to be accused of being too biased to right or left. There's a question over here.
Do you dare comment on the presidential elections that are coming? Where is the leader? Who is the leader that could take us where we need to go?
That's you.
I'm going to shut this up.
Well, at this point, I could do some more crowdsourcing and take a vote.
Yeah, crowdsourcing. Right.
Yeah. Who would like to say who is a leader who's going to take us?
I'll start by saying that I think it's early days. So I think that you can't punt. No, but I mean, there are going to be plenty of candidates out there, And do they understand, and are they talking about what they ought to be talking about? And I think it's up to all of us to say that it is unacceptable to only be fighting over whether the problem is inequality or mobility. The issue is, what are you going to do to make sure that we can grow more good jobs in a global economy? What are you going to do to make sure that we can prepare people for the jobs of the future, and to be looking for new solutions? Because infrastructure is essential, but it's a basic. Every single person you should expect to have a plan that will rehabilitate America's infrastructure and build out the technology infrastructure we need to compete in the world in the future. Well, those are the basics, but you got to ask for a lot more than that.
Well, that is a very tactful answer. I'd like to ask Tom, who is your money on?
No, I'm not doing that.
This is the first time you've been shy.
No, it's actually not, because let me tell you something, and this is something we believe to our core. We don't pick sides at Southern Company. We have to play both sides of the aisle. We've got to work with everybody to bring them together to create solutions. So I don't pitch Southern Company as a Republican company or a Democrat company. We support both. What we support is good policy, okay? And here's my view. I think there are plenty of good candidates out there. It's amazing on the Republican side. You have, this seeming endless stream of people.
Who's not running for president?
Yeah, raise your hand. I think there's plenty of people there. Of course, lay aside kind of people on the fringes. And if you hear the conventional wisdom on the talk shows, I think the conventional wisdom is generally right. The unfortunate thing about the primary process, it makes people run to the fringes, and what people want to do in the general is run to the middle. We got to get back in the middle. And so, to the extent candidates have the courage to say that I have a North Star, that I'm going to go to the middle, even during the primary process, and solve the big problems, get rid of the litmus test votes and all the craziness that gets involved in that, and really stay focused on these big issues, I think those are the people who emerge as leaders of the enterprise.
I'm going to quote Mark Warner for you, because I heard Mark say something last night that's really important. And I don't know if you're going to say it again. Okay, so Mark said, it's not about right or left, it's about the past and the future. And I think that's really important.
I think I support Hillary. But what I'd like to see in this campaign is honest truth about our balance sheet. I'd like to see a comprehensive energy policy that does have all of the above in a way that recognizes the real threat of climate change. I'd like someone to understand that the whole nature of work is fundamentally changing, and the 20th century definitions don't work in the 21st century. And I'd like to have the notion that low and moderate income workers, and I think there's some ideas that have floated around here and elsewhere that is going to need a governmental push, and not simply B Corps and double social bottom line, that gives low and moderate income workers some sense that capitalism is going to work for them. I think the focus on short-term, quarterly driven capitalism is going to destroy capitalism. And we need a capitalism that actually works for the 21st century for low and moderate income workers that have that upward economic mobility. And I think that is absolutely possible. And we did it in the 20th century, and we can do it in a technology-driven 21st century, but it's going to require breaking some glass.
Define energy policy. Define energy policy by a balance of clean, safe, reliable, and affordable energy for the benefit of the customers that we serve. Don't define it by a single point of view on a single issue.
Well, that seems like a good note to pause there. I mean, I found this discussion fascinating. Personally, I have three big takeaways. Firstly, that talking about economics with a group like this can be fun. Doesn't have to be all about boring numbers. Secondly, that there are a lot of fantastic ideas floating around, a very mixed bag of ideas about what can be done to revitalize the American economy. Far from convinced that these ideas are going to be on the campaign trail, but they should be. Third, perhaps most encouraging point of all, is that we've now spent an entire hour talking about revitalizing the American economy, talking about how to get growth, and not once has anybody asked a question about the Fed or about the banks. And that, to my mind, is real progress. So thank you all very much indeed, and best of luck sorting it out.